The floating world, survival inside the closed door. Have you ever truly imagined what life was like inside Noah's Ark? We often picture a serene wooden boat bobbing on gentle waves, with animals peering curiously out of windows, but the reality was far more intense. When the door closed, sealed by a hand not human, the Ark ceased to be just a structure. It transformed into the most extreme environment on the planet where life still existed. It was a capsule of survival floating over a drowned world. Inside were thousands of living animals, different species confined in the same space. Predators and prey were separated only by wooden compartments. There was constant darkness, high humidity, heavy air, continuous noise, and movement without pause. There was no route, no visible destination, and no human control over the path. The Ark wasn't built to sail like an ordinary ship. It didn't need to cut through the waters, it needed to withstand them. From the moment the door closed, the Ark went into operation, and nothing inside could depend on improvisation. There was no way to stop at a port to adjust the cargo, no way to correct structural flaws afterward. Everything needed to function continuously, day after day, under extreme conditions. Because any mistake there would not only cause discomfort, it would cause losses. And losses in an isolated environment meant the extinction of a species. Part 1. The physics of chaos. The Ark was not under human control. It moved as the waters moved, the great deep had broken open, and the world was in upheaval. This meant constant tilting, repeated impacts from debris or waves, sudden shifts in balance, and external forces that no one inside could predict or stop. This meant that for months, everything inside the Ark was subject to continuous movement. There was no firm ground, no absolute rest, no fixed point that remained completely stable. In such an environment, stability was not a luxury. It was the bedrock of survival. Any loose object became a projectile risk. Any poorly distributed weight became a threat to the vessel's center of gravity. Any repeated displacement became an accumulated structural problem. A small movement, when repeated thousands of times, ceases to be small. It wears down materials, it tires joints, it generates progressive failure. Inside the Ark, nothing could move freely with each sway of the ship. Nothing could oscillate uncontrollably. Nothing could react unpredictably. Surviving there meant not only being protected from the water outside, but also ensuring that the interior itself did not become an enemy. Even before thinking about hunger, thirst, hygiene, or rest, Noah and his family had an absolute priority: preventing the internal environment from collapsing. Because in a closed system, danger doesn't just come from the storm outside. It arises from the sum of small, ignored problems inside. Part 2. The biology of confinement. But maintaining the stability of the environment was only the first challenge. The greatest risk wasn't the wood and pitch structure, but the living beings inside. When the Ark became operational, the greatest internal danger wasn't the floodwaters, but the behavior of the animals themselves. Thousands of living beings of different species remained confined for months in a limited space. Some were small and fragile, others enormous and powerful. Some were docile by nature, others guided by sharp predatory instincts. The biblical text makes it clear that there weren't just a few symbolic animals. There were enough representatives to preserve the terrestrial and aerial species necessary for the continuation of life. This created an immediate and volatile problem. Animals under stress react badly to prolonged confinement, to constant movement, to continuous noise, to the forced proximity of other species. Imagine predators smelling prey just feet away, territorial species without territory to roam, animals sensitive to stress without the possibility of escape. Under normal conditions, this pressure cooker could result in attacks, injuries, self-harm, collective panic, and chain deaths. A single outbreak of agitation in one compartment would be enough to generate a reaction in others, spreading like a wave of panic. A single injured animal would be enough to cause stress in entire sectors due to the scent of blood or distress. A single moment of chaos would be enough to compromise the stability of the environment. Therefore, maintaining order was not optional, it was vital. The interior space could not be open and free. It could not allow unrestricted circulation. It could not allow accidental encounters between incompatible species. The biblical text uses a specific term when describing the interior of the ark: compartments or nests. Not open areas, not large halls compartments. This indicates division, functional separation, and strict control of movement. Each animal needed to remain contained, separated, organized, and controlled. Confinement, although it may seem cruel from a modern perspective of freedom, was a mechanism of safety. It reduced risks. Animals that move less expend less energy. Expending less energy, they require less food. Eating less, they produce less waste. Producing less waste, they reduce the impact on the internal environment. Furthermore, less physical activity reduces aggression, impulsiveness, and unpredictable behavior. This didn't eliminate risk, but it drastically reduced chaos. Another crucial point is how the animals entered the ark. The text states that they came to Noah. This eliminates the most dangerous phase of any operation with wild animals: forced capture. There was no mass persecution, no tranquilizers, no widespread violent containment. When the door closed, the animals were already organized within the prepared space, guided by a divine instinct that superseded their natural ones. From then on, the priority was not domestication, but keeping the system functioning. Part 3: The Logistics of Life. But keeping animals alive didn't just mean preventing conflict, they needed to survive physically. And surviving physically requires something inevitable: food. All those animals needed to eat every day for months. And the biblical text makes one point clear: the food didn't miraculously appear on shelves after the door closed, it was already inside. Noah had been commanded to gather it. This means prior planning, calculation of caloric needs, and total dependence on continuous organization. If the food spoiled due to humidity or pests, the system would collapse. If it was poorly distributed, some species would die before the end. If access were disorganized, conflicts could arise over resources. In an enclosed environment, food cannot be carelessly exposed. Humidity causes mold. Mold compromises food quality. Compromised food causes disease. Diseases spread, and in an enclosed space, an illness cannot remain isolated. Another critical factor was human effort. 8 people: Noah, his wife, his 3 sons, and their wives needed to deal daily with thousands of animals. They had to distribute food, monitor behavior, observe signs of disease, maintain order, and correct problems before they became irreversible. If the entire system depended on constant physical strength, it would fail. The human body could not sustain this level of high-intensity effort for more than a year without collapsing. Therefore, the routine needed to be feasible, sustainable, and repeatable. It could not depend on daily heroism. It needed to depend on method. Repetitive tasks needed to be simplified, travel distances within the ark needed to be reduced, and physical strain needed to be minimized. The goal was not to do more, but to be able to do it every day, without fail. Part 4: The waste and the air. But feeding thousands of animals was only part of the problem. Biology dictates that everything that goes in must come out, and this creates an even more dangerous challenge. Thousands of animals continuously produce waste, urine, feces, and gases. If this waste accumulated, the internal environment would quickly become toxic. Urine releases ammonia, Feces release harmful methane and other gases. Enclosed spaces concentrate odors and toxins rapidly. Without control, the air would become unbreathable, infections would spread, parasites would find an ideal environment. Animals would get sick, and so would the people. Daily manual cleaning of all compartments would be unfeasible for such a small group of 8 humans. The system needed to function even when no one was cleaning all the time. Constant movement, inclination, and gravity became natural allies. The structure likely utilized sloped floors or drainage systems where the motion of the ship helped move waste away from living areas. What couldn't be removed by human effort needed to be removed by the environment itself. This wasn't a luxury, it was a basic necessity, because inside the ark, the greatest danger didn't come from the rain outside, but from the daily accumulation of small, ignored internal problems. But even controlling solid and liquid waste, there was still a silent, invisible, progressive enemy, the air. Breathing inside the ark wasn't automatic, it was a permanent technical challenge. Thousands of living animals produce body heat, humidity, carbon dioxide, and other gases. In an enclosed environment, all of this accumulates. Oxygen decreases at lower levels. Stale air concentrates, heavy gases remain trapped. The danger is not immediate. It is slow, progressive, and difficult to perceive until the effects are already advanced. Animals don't drop dead all at once. They become slower, stop eating, become apathetic, get sick, and die silently. The biblical text mentions a small but crucial detail, an opening a window or ventilation system at the top of the structure. Finished to a cubit from above, it had no aesthetic function. It wasn't for contemplating the landscape. Its function needed to be practical. Hot air rises. Upon finding an exit at the top, it escapes. As it exits, it creates negative pressure that draws in cooler, fresh air from outside. This creates continuous circulation, a chimney effect, without the need for constant human effort or fans, a simple but constant system. The interior of the ark needed to breathe. Without it, no other system would function. But air circulation only solved part of the problem, because along with the air came heat. Excessive heat alters animal behavior, increases aggression, increases water consumption, and increases physical wear and tear. Thermal balance was as important as oxygen. Everything needed to work together: air entering, air leaving, heat being dissipated, humidity being controlled, without allowing the torrential rain to enter. An error at this point would not only cause discomfort, it would cause internal collapse. Part 5. The human siege. And even if food, waste, and air were under control, physical survival still did not solve the greatest challenge. Because the challenge inside the ark was not just animal, it was human. Inside the ark, physical survival was only half the battle. The other challenge was mental. 8 people remained confined for more than a year in a closed, unstable, noisy, and exhausting environment. They were without freedom, without a visible horizon, without knowing when it would end. The Bible states that it was God Himself who closed the door of the ark. This means there was no option to give up. There was no escape plan, no way to interrupt the mission when exhaustion became extreme or tempers flared. Prolonged confinement has well-known psychological effects. Constant repetition wears you down. Continuous noise irritates the nerves. Lack of privacy pressures relationships. The absence of silence consumes the mind. Inside, there was no way to get away for long. There was no way to escape the routine. There was no way to ignore conflicts long enough for them to disappear. Any unresolved tension one day would return the next, and the next, and the next. Therefore, survival required something beyond physical strength. It required emotional structure. It required order. It required discipline. Routine was not merely for efficiency, it was for sanity. Routine was not comfort, it was control. Tasks needed to have strict schedules. Roles needed to be clear. Responsibilities needed to be defined. Without routine, the internal environment would quickly become chaotic. And in a closed system, chaos doesn't stay localized. It spreads. Exhaustion generates error. Error generates failure. Failure generates crisis. Crisis in an isolated environment can compromise everything. Another decisive factor was leadership. The Bible describes Noah as someone who walked with God. In this context, this is not just a spiritual statement, it's a functional fact. Extreme environments demand stable leadership. Decisions need to be respected. Roles need to be maintained. Order needs to be preserved even when emotional strain increases. Without clear leadership, collective effort fragments, tasks overlap, conflicts grow, and efficiency falls. Inside the ark, leadership wasn't a title, it was a survival factor. Part VI, the weight of time, but even with routine, organization, and leadership, there was something impossible to control with human methods: time. They didn't know how long it would last. They didn't know when the waters would recede. They didn't know when they would set foot on dry land again. Living without a defined deadline transforms any mission into a profound psychological test. Each day can seem endless. Each week can seem the same as the last. Each month can erode hope. The ark wasn't just a physical space. It was an environment of prolonged resistance. It was a waiting room for a new world. But the waiting was agonizing. But time would pass. The rain stopped. The fountains of the deep closed. The waters eventually began to recede, and the ark, after months of continuous motion, finally stopped. It came to rest on the mountains of Ararat. But stopping didn't mean immediate safety. Part 7. The strategic departure. The outside world had been transformed. The environment that existed before the flood could no longer be used as a reference. The soil had been altered, the vegetation destroyed, the ecosystem disrupted. Leaving too soon could mean death in a barren land. Waiting too long could compromise internal resources as food stocks dwindled. The decision couldn't be emotional, it needed to be strategic. The Bible records that Noah didn't open the ark on impulse. Even after realizing the waters were receding and the boat was stationary, he waited. The first test wasn't done with people. It was done with animals. Noah released a raven. The raven left, flew away, and returned, flying back and forth until the waters dried up. This indicated that there was something out there, perhaps carrion or floating debris, but not yet enough stability for life to thrive. Then Noah released a dove. It left, flew away, and quickly returned to him because it found no place to set its foot. This indicated that there was still no safe, dry place to land. He waited again. 7 days passed. The tension continued. Then he released the dove once more. This time, it returned in the evening, and in its beak was a freshly plucked olive leaf. This indicated something extremely important. Vegetation had begun to reappear. Plant life was returning. Photosynthesis was happening. The earth was waking up. Even so, Noah did not open the door. He waited once more, 7 more days. Only when the dove was released a third time and did not return did it become clear that the external environment already supported life in a stable way. The bird had found a home outside. The departure was not immediate, not impulsive, not chaotic. It was gradual, orderly, controlled. God spoke to Noah, telling him to leave. The animals left according to their species, families, and kinds. The internal organization was maintained until the very last moment. Nothing was done hastily. Nothing was done out of anxiety. Nothing was done impulsively. The ark did not fulfill its role merely by floating on the waters. It fulfilled its role by functioning flawlessly every day, from the moment the door closed until the moment life could begin again. Conclusion: the forge of the future. The story of the Ark is not just about biological survival, it's also about preserving purpose. Nothing there was improvised along the way. Nothing was sustained by luck, nothing was maintained by chance. What kept all those species alive was not just external protection from the waves, but continuous internal functioning, order under pressure, discipline under strain, and obedience under uncertainty. But there is an even deeper point in this story. The Ark didn't just preserve bodies. Without the days lived inside, a new beginning outside would have been impossible, because surviving outside in a raw, new world would require the same virtues that sustained life inside. In the end, the question isn't just what it was like to live inside the Ark. The question is, what did living inside the Ark produce in those who survived? That extreme environment didn't just protect bodies. It prepared people, it prepared them to rebuild. It prepared them to preserve. It prepared them to continue the story of humanity. And so, the Ark ceases to be just an event of the past. She becomes a portrait of what it means to resist, to preserve, and to start over under the most extreme conditions possible. Perhaps the greatest mystery is not how they survived the mechanics of the Ark, but what needed to change within them so that the world could begin again.